Welcome to the Ask a Matchmaker podcast. I'm your host, Matchmaker Maria, and this week's guest is Stephanie Movahhed. She's a San Francisco-based leadership coach, and she helps people find growth, fulfillment, and success in their work and lives. I figured we should bring on a coach this week because we've had lots of things happening in the last 6 weeks, and some of us need a bit of a mindset shift. And Stephanie here is going to help us with that. Stephanie, welcome to the Ask a Matchmaker podcast.
Thanks, Maria. Happy to be here today.
Oh, yeah, of course. And, okay, so Stephanie, she invests, you invest in, I don't know why I'm talking to a third person. You invest in startups and you advise founders, and you're certified by the ICF, when you also hold an MBA from the Michigan Ross School of Business. So you've got the credentials. We met over the last summer, and I was just really taken back by you're kind of like process oriented and like the can-do attitude. And I was like, oh yeah, this would be really good one day on the podcast. Cause I feel like sometimes we need to like step away from just like the dating talk and just like kind of focus on like, where are we at on this path?
Yeah, totally, Maria. And I would say, when we met, I was just blown away by everything that you're doing with your business. And I love the way that you work with your dating matchmaking clients around mindset and around helping them, really grow. So I think you're a great coach, and yeah, I'm just so excited to be here.
Thanks, Steph. Thank you. Okay. So tell me a little bit more about how you found this role that you're in right now.
Yeah, definitely. So my story, as you mentioned, I have a business background. So I actually started my career as a teacher, and I used to teach English and Spanish. I was always really interested in helping people kind of transform their lives and grow. And I was doing that. And then eventually I moved to the Bay Area, and as one does in San Francisco, I just ended up finding this interesting job at Google. And I started my career working at Google. And that made me think, oh, okay, well, if I'm going to do this tech work, I should probably go back to school and get an MBA. So I got my MBA. I went back to tech, and I did a ton of different work around strategy and product development. But along the way, I really realized that I cared more about developing leaders than I did about developing products. And so on the side, I trained as a leadership coach. And I just, I would go into my coaching sessions with my clients, and I found so much energy, so much joy, so much happiness being present with them in our sessions, that I actually decided to leave the tech world behind. And now I work for myself as a leadership coach, coaching leaders within organization. It's also with folks who come to me to invest in their own growth and development.
What does a session with you entail?
Great question. So I love coaching around a whole variety of topics. But one of the magical things about coaching is that there's no one formula. And you probably know this from working with your matchmaking clients. It's really about what's alive and present for the client. So in our sessions, I always start out by asking them, what is it that you want coaching on today? And we also talk about, coming out of this hour, what do you want to walk away with? Some people just want to process what's going on with them. Other people want to come up with a more tactical plan that they can implement as soon as they get out of the session. So it really depends on what is most urgent, most relevant for that particular client. And we'll talk for about say 40 minutes. And then in the last part of the session, we'll design some sort of action or some sort of challenge. Often I'll ask, what's one thing that you can do in the next 2 weeks to get yourself closer to where you discussed wanting to go? And then, coaching is great for accountability. So I'll actually have them follow up with me and let me know that they did that thing.
Do you feel like just because you assign homework, that doesn't necessarily mean that someone's going to do it?
Great point. Yeah. So I always say, let's talk about homework. It's totally optional. If you want to do it, you do it. If you don't want to do it, that's also, that's on you. And then in the next session, we always talk about, did you or did you not do the homework? And sometimes the client might say, I went to do it, and actually I realized that something else would be a better use of my time. Or they say, I didn't do it because this is really hard. And then we might coach on that.
Do you help them with the task that you've assigned them?
Good question. I don't. I think a lot of the tasks are around visioning or journaling or dreaming of what's next. And so they're not necessarily things that I can help with, because they really come from the client's intuition and, their inner knowledge and what they're longing for.
you're touching now like on intuition. And I feel like that also comes like from a place of like, mindfulness and emotion. And what is it that people can do to boost the performance of those things to like, meet their goals or find their happiness? What would you advise?
Yeah, I love that question, Maria. So I'm a big believer in really tuning into ourselves through mindfulness. I am trained in a coaching program called Positive Intelligence, which is
Mhm.
all about how we can meet the challenges of our lives with positive emotions.
Can
And
you give me
how
an
can you
example?
Sure. So let's say, for example, you have a challenging presentation at work. How can you show up to that presentation with curiosity, with playfulness, with action, rather than showing up with perfectionism or, really feeling like fear or self-judgment? So the idea is, when we feel these feelings of fear or self-judgment, we can tune into ourselves, really focus on, say, one sense, our sense of touch or breathing. And through tuning into ourselves, then we can start to shift towards these positive emotions. We can ask ourselves, when I'm coming from a place of curiosity, how do I feel about this presentation? When I'm coming from a place of self-empathy, how do I feel about the fact that, I just wasn't as patient as I wish I could have been with my sister? So it's really about shifting from self-judgment or from perfectionism to these positive qualities like empathy, curiosity, playfulness.
Do you find, like, what would you say to someone, for instance, like, oh, like, what kind of exercises would you advise someone to do when it comes to like, that particular example, like you feel stress at work?
Yeah, great question. So, what I advise my clients to do is really tuning into themselves through mindfulness. Just take, say, 20 seconds and just slow yourself down, close your eyes, and focus on deep breathing for those 20 seconds. And you can really feel that. I think in like sort of modern language, we oftentimes talk about getting triggered. You're
Mhm.
triggered, and then also everything speeds up, right? So, all of your emotions are heightened. So what I advise my clients to do is slow yourself down, take 20 seconds to just tune into your breathing. And then, once you've done that, come back to the topic and also ask yourself, how can I apply a lens of curiosity? How does this connect to my own growth? And really tune in to what is the opportunity as opposed to what is the fear.
Feel like I'm lately experiencing this with some of my employees too. Like I can see that sometimes there's this immense anxiety that happens. Like, I know that matchmaking and coaching can seem like a really glamorous job, but at the end of the day, everyone's still staring at an Excel sheet. Uh, and a lot of it is like managing people's like personal expectations. So they're not even professional expectations, they're personal, right?
Sure.
Um, and sometimes I just feel like I'm saying this now as a boss, not as a matchmaker, right?
Hmm.
I'll say like my employees will take on the anxiety that like my client is. I don't even think they're consciously aware that they might be driving anxiety. Like they'll say, for instance, "Oh, that doesn't work for me. When can we do this date or whatever?" They'll do some minor pushback, but suddenly that one sentence spins off this like anxiety city situation. And I have to step in and be like, why are you letting this bother you? Just talk back. Like they're not
Yeah.
even saying something mean or bad. They're just saying that's just not going to work. They're asking you to like find a different solution.
Right. Right.
So
And
why not just pick up the phone and figure that out? Like I'm just lately this has just been kind of frustrating. I mean, I guess it's always exists, but now I'm kind of like I'm more aware of it.
yeah, you're tuned into it and you're aware. And yeah, I would suggest also, there's probably an emotion that's coming up for your employee behind what they're presenting as frustration, but maybe it's fear of disappointing that client, or maybe it's um
Right.
some sadness about things not turning out the way they had originally planned. And so I think it's also, it sounds like you're already doing this, but asking them powerful questions to help them identify, what is it that's coming up for them. We can unpack frustration into all these different ways. And then if it's fear of disappointing the client, then there's a series of questions like, what is it? that the client wants. What is it that you can offer? Is this you disappointing them, or is this just, the day to day, and just really getting them to process and reflect? I'm sure, would be really helpful.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit more about, you've done positive intelligence. What would you say to someone who wants to like boost their performance,
Yeah,
be it at work, in their dating life? Cause I feel like if you're single and you really want to be in a relationship, that's your new part-time job. Or even like their well-being, like what would you advise here?
for sure. So I love this question, first of all. So there's a couple things. So I think in any coaching, there's a few components. So I think the first component is really asking yourself, what is it that I want? And when I get in a session with a client, part of my job is to ask them powerful, open-ended questions.
Like
But we
what?
can also, so a great question is, someone says, I'm not happy in my career.
Hmm.
Um, so I might ask, on a scale of 1 to 10, where are you at in your career? And they'll usually say something like, oh, I'm a 5.
Oh,
And then I
wow.
say, what would it look like if you were a 10? And so just simply asking them, what does a 10 look like for you in career, moves them away from kind of loving the problem, really talking about what's wrong. And you see them get excited about what could be right. And so as someone starts to talk to me about what a 10 looks like, I listen for values. So maybe what I hear is what's most important to them is autonomy, and they don't have autonomy in their current career. And then we can talk about, okay, what are some small shifts you could make to get more autonomy? Maybe intellectual curiosity is big for them and they feel like they're not getting that. And we can talk about maybe in your current career, there isn't a lot of opportunity for curiosity and intellectual growth, but maybe you can get that through something you do in your personal life. So what I would encourage someone who's interested in making progress in an area, say at their career, their physical well-being, maybe even their romantic and emotional life, ask yourself, what would it look like if I could say I was at a 10 in this variable? With 10 being the most fulfilled I could imagine, just dream on that for a little bit. And then once you have that vision, start to think about what are some small shifts I can make to get myself closer to that.
Oh, I love that. I totally love that. And then how about like when it comes to, and shifting, I feel like in that mindset, like I've always felt like who you surround yourself with, you tend to be the average of that.
Yeah.
You're nodding along. So tell me what you think about what I'm saying.
Yeah, this is a huge thing for me. I have heard, I think we're thinking on the same quote, like you become a combination of the 5 people that you spend the most time with.
Oh
And so
yeah. And also I feel like even your income, it tends to be the average of those five too. I've that's what I've heard at least, but I
that's
feel like that checks
fascinating.
out.
I hadn't heard that, but that makes perfect sense to me. Yeah, I think it also just relates to sort of representation. It's like you have to see it in order to know that it's possible. And so if you surround yourself with people that have the mindset that you want to have, it feels more possible. If you're really focused on financial abundance and all your friends are really more coming from a place of scarcity, that can rub off on you. So I really, for myself and also for my clients, encourage people to spend their time with people that they see as aspirational. Like find
Mm.
friends that are already where you want to go, and then watch them and learn from them and soak in their vibe.
Yeah, I feel like that's actually so I met you because you came to my retreat in Greece last year. And I feel like one of the things that I'm probably the most proud of is like bringing women together that didn't know each other before, but there is sort of like-mindedness and like just like a really good vibe. And it's funny. I used to think that only your group was like that last summer, but no, it was exactly like that when I had the next retreat in Tulum. It was exactly like that. Last week I hosted like like an impromptu cocktail party in Los Angeles, and like 100 women showed up and it was amazing. But it was like, to me, what was funny about that group was that it was the same vibe as last year in Greece. Like it makes me excited for like their next retreat happening in Greece in a few months. It's like, oh yeah, like this is what that means. It's like trying to get to a new friend group that is sharing in the similar vibe to like bring you to a different place.
Yeah, and that's such a great point, Maria. I always tell people that, um, you know, one of the best things about going on your retreat was I came away with this amazing community of like-minded women who are so focused on, personal and professional growth and, in all the ways that I am. And it's been so enriching to surround myself with them. And so I think you're touching on another really important point, which is I think when we want to make changes in our lives, if we have a community of people around us who support us, we're much more likely to be successful. I've been doing a lot of group coaching now. I started with one-on-one, but now I also coach groups. And that's been really powerful. Just the additional accountability and also the
camaraderie.
The sense that we're not alone when we're experiencing these challenges. So I 100% agree with you that community is important for change and for making forward momentum in your life. Side note, I did see that you were in LA, and can I put in a plug for San Francisco for a future happy hour? There's lots of ladies here who would love to see you.
It's funny you say that. I was thinking about doing like a little city tour. But it was like, but why? That sort of thing. Like, cause I was in LA for a different reason. I was just like, well, hey, if I'm in LA, let's just do this, and I was just playing around with it. I didn't realize that many people would show up, but now I'm like, should I do Ask a Matchmaker live, like in different cities? And then I'm like, that's like such a big endeavor. I need someone to like, who already does this for other podcasts, to just show up and be like, hey, I heard your podcast that you're looking for, like, I don't know, an events manager. I already do this with this podcast. I would love to take on yours. I'll be like, yes, like that way I don't have to like interview and like figure this out. Like, please just let me delegate it to someone who's already experienced, and like, we can figure it out from there. So that's me saying that out loud in case anyone hears this and is like, oh yeah. But to go back to the community thing for a second, like, what advice would you give to someone who's like, all right, Maria, I don't want to go on your retreats. I'm not interested in meeting in cities. I don't care about, the people that follow you or listen to this podcast. And that's totally fine, by the way. But I would really love I'd really love to be in a community and find my community. What would you advise people who are seeking that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say that I think trust and deep connection is built through consistent interactions. And so something like a book club or a run club or an improv comedy class, like something that you go to every week where you see the same people, can be really helpful in making new friends and for feeling that sense of community. I have a book club that I've been in for over 10 years now.
Oh, wow.
And now those women are just like my best friends. But I think the reason we developed such a deep connection is we were reading all these books, and then we were talking about, this reminds me of my upbringing, or, this connects back to the way I feel about my parents. And we were just talking about all these deep themes month after month, and it became a really great community. So I would definitely encourage people to look for something like that, where they can meet repeatedly with the same group of people.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think that's such a great idea. Shout out to Toastmasters, because I'm always telling people, like, just join the Toastmasters. There's like so many of them. And it's just I think it's just a very open and positive vibe. But it's the same too. Like if someone's telling me like, oh, I want to join like a cooking class that meets for 6 weeks, do it, because I feel like in those 6 weeks, you just don't know what could happen.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. And the one-time things are great, but it's sort of just like, you meet someone one time and then you don't know if they're going to stay in your life. But if you can find something that's repeated, then I feel like that's where you can really start to build more connection. But yeah, I always think of you when people ask you like, oh, I don't want to do online dating. And you say things like, get on Eventbrite and find events in your city. And I think it's the same thing. It's like, how do we make connections? We go out and we do the things that we're passionate about in community with other people.
And one last question. Tell me about the science around positive intelligence.
Yeah, that's a great question, Maria. So one of the things that really attracted me to the positive intelligence coaching program is that I think it's very much grounded in science. And the person who founded it is a coach. And essentially what he talks about is our brains are hardwired to go towards fear and scarcity. And that really relates back to almost imagine like in a different historical time period, like humans were under threat. And so it's very natural that that's how historically we've been wired, to look for threats in our environment and to react to those threats, fight or flight. So if you want to move away from that type of reactive approach, you have to practice and you have to almost develop new mental muscles. So just like you would go to the gym and you would work out for 30 minutes 3 times a week, and you wouldn't see necessarily huge results immediately, but if you did that for 6 weeks, you'd start to look different. And if you did that for 6 months, wow, you'd really see change. With our mindset, we have to practice. And so what I encourage my clients to do is just spend 10 minutes every morning. Do a simple meditation where you're really focusing on tuning into yourself and how you feel. In my own life, I do a meditation and then I do a gratitude journal. And I do that every single morning just to reinforce I have all of these wonderful things in my life that I should be grateful for. And as you do that over and over again, it just starts to get easier because you're building that mental muscle. And in positive intelligence, we talk about remapping the neurons in our brain so that our brain knows to go to that place of calm, confidence, and abundance, as opposed to fear and scarcity.
I gotta say, when you say the word meditation, I kind of like, because
Oh,
I think I
interesting.
really suck at meditation. So tell
Really?
me about how you're meditating, because I
Yeah,
need to
no,
learn.
that's
Maybe I
awesome.
don't know
And
how to turn off my brain, but I've been told maybe on a previous podcast that I recorded that meditation is like allowing your brain to come back to like those original thoughts when you're trying to turn off. I don't know how to meditate. So tell me a little bit more about your meditation journey, and like, do you use any like guides, like an app,
yeah,
or do you listen to anything or whatever?
yeah. And I will say that I'm exactly the same way as you, Maria. I have a hyperactive mind. And like, usually when I'm supposed to be meditating, I'm like thinking about my grocery list that I'm going to go get at Whole Foods the next day.
Totally.
It's just like I'm always planning. So, what really helped me was I read a meditation book, Intro to Meditation, and the teacher
Mhm.
was like um, like a really seasoned meditator. And she talked about counting her breaths. And she asked, how far do you think I can get counting my breaths before I get distracted? And, in my mind, I'm like, oh, she could probably get to like 50 or 60 breaths. And she said, I can only get to 3 breaths before I get distracted, but then I just bring myself back. So I think it's very normal and appropriate that we get distracted. And it's not something to feel like we're failing at meditation. What I do is, now it's going to sound like a plug, but I use the Positive Intelligence app, and they offer short 2-minute meditations, which is really just about for 2 minutes tuning into one sense. So I tune into my breath and I just focus on those breaths for 2 minutes. And I think what's good about 2 minutes is it's so short, right? It's not like
Right.
something to dread. And then once I did 2 minutes daily, I started moving to 5 minutes. And I think, maybe at some point I'll get to 10 minutes, but right now 5 minutes feels great. And so I just tune into my breath and count those breaths for that short 5-minute period. And that works really well for me. So there's the Positive Intelligence app. And then the other thing, I can't remember if you use Peloton, but I also love the Peloton app, and they have great 5-minute meditations there that you can just follow along with.
Oh, I love that. I gotta say, I go on YouTube and look up lucid dreaming. Do you know what
Oh,
that is?
yeah.
So I'll do that sometimes when I feel like really stressed out or I just need to like unwind. Also, it just makes me feel good.
Uh-huh.
I'll put on the Bluetooth sleeping headphones.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so that way I don't feel like something's in my ear.
Yeah.
And I'll lay down on my back, which I'm a side sleeper, so that's like an effort. But then I'll follow the guide of like lucid dreaming. And it's like a 6-hour video on YouTube. You have to have your phone plugged in. Don't turn it off. But I feel like within the first 10 minutes, I am in a place of like extreme calm and like openness. Like I feel very vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes me feel good. And now I'm wondering, like, oh, that's probably meditation.
Yeah. Yeah. You're just really tuning into yourself as you're doing that. And do you then journal afterwards at all?
I mean, I'm in the habit of just writing stuff down like all
Mm-hmm.
day, every day. I have a daily planner
Mm-hmm.
and I use that as a journal. So I'm constantly writing down yesterday we're recording on February 2nd. So yesterday, like I wrote down like how I want my month of February to go. And then I'll keep checking in and then I'll write down like important dates. So like I do use that, but like in terms of like journaling every evening, I usually do this thing I call info dumping
Okay.
every night right before bed for like 3 minutes. And that's sometimes in my daily agenda, or sometimes I'll just text it to myself just to remember it. And that's just where I just put everything that I'm thinking about that I'm like, oh, hold on to this. Don't forget to do this tomorrow. Don't forget to do this tomorrow. Like all that stuff. I just dump it down so I don't sleep with that anxiety.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah,
deal
that's
with it
great.
tomorrow.
And I love what you said about the first of the month. I'm a huge fan of intentions, and I'm actually not that big into New Year's resolutions because I think everybody sets those and they forget about them in the first couple weeks of January. But I love the idea of, checking in each month and thinking about, what do I want to accomplish this month and doing that to grow and develop. So I love that little tidbit. And then the other thing I wanted to tell you is that I think for growth and change, and this, consistency and routine is so important. So
Oh
I
yeah.
love hearing that you have these daily routines, and I'm big on morning routine. I feel like if you can really set yourself up right in the morning, you can put yourself in the right mindset to just, have the best day and to achieve all your goals. And so I think what you're talking about with evening routines is also just like, I love hearing that.
Oh yeah. I like my whole life is a routine. Like in the morning, I know exactly what I'm gonna do the first 2 hours I'm awake. That has not deviated the slightest the last few years. But it's, yeah, it just makes it a lot easier to accomplish that. So I'm happy to hear it from an expert that that's like a good
Yeah.
thing too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Stephanie, this was wonderful. I love that we got a glimpse into your world. Where can people learn more about you?
Yeah. So you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm at S Movahhed at LinkedIn. And then you can also find me on my website, which is www.stephaniemovahhed.com. I'm also on Instagram at Steph Moves Ahead.
I love it. And I'm going to include all those links in the show notes. Go ahead. And you're like the first person to add a LinkedIn.
I
That's like
know.
hilarious to me. I do not know how to use that website or app.
We should talk more about it because I'm going to, when you air this podcast, I'm going to say that I was on your podcast and link
Uh-huh.
to you. And I think it's a great audience for you.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. I think that there's some audience in there for me too. But I'm always like, how do people, there's a lot of, every time I open up LinkedIn, there's like 500 people who like,
Want to connect to you?
want to connect. And like half of them want to pitch me their products. And I'm like,
No,
I'm
that is
not
annoying.
interested. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a funny shift. So I used to work at LinkedIn. That was one of my
Uh-huh.
longest jobs, was working at LinkedIn. So I'm
Right.
happy to talk about it at some point offline. But it is interesting that as an entrepreneur, now that I own my own business, like 50% of the stuff I get in LinkedIn is just people trying to pitch services to me. And,
It
I
just
think they
feels
need to clean that up.
overwhelming. Like the
Yeah.
feed itself too feels really overwhelming because I can see where people have turned it into like a Facebook 2.0.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll see posts that are like meant to like stress you out. And I'm just like this, or it's very performative.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm
Mm-hmm.
just like, okay, I don't know if this is my audience. Like I'm always just very confused by LinkedIn, but I'm really happy to promote your LinkedIn on my show notes and see what happens. And I'd love, and I can't wait to see you promote on LinkedIn. And for anyone listening, yeah, please tell your friends, hello, put it on your LinkedIn too. Uh, Stephanie, again, thank you so much for coming to the Ask a Matchmaker podcast.
It's been my pleasure, Maria. I love what you're doing. I love how your platform is focused on inspiring and helping women and all people to live their best lives. So just really happy to collaborate with you here.
Absolutely. And thank you for listening to the Ask a Matchmaker podcast. You know what to do. Go tell a friend. Of course, go tell a friend, whoever needs today's episode. And I'm sure there's a friend out there who's might be feeling it the last 2 months, especially with the recent layoffs. Send them this. Like there are ways out of that darkness. And it's just about taking that one single step. Of course, be lovable, but more importantly, be likable. See you next week.